Hello everyone! Today, I'd like to go over a budget commander deck that I've built around Agatha of the Vile Cauldron. As usual, I've designed this deck to cost less than $45 at the time of recording, using prices listed by Scryfall, including basic lands at 10 cents each, but not including the cost of shipping, taxes, and the like. But let's get into this deck. So, Agatha of the Vile Cauldron is a 1/1 human warlock that costs a red and a green mana to cast, and makes it so activated abilities of our creatures will cost X generic less to activate, where X is Agatha's power, but this ability can't reduce those costs below 1 mana. Additionally, Agatha has the activated ability for 4 generic, a red and a green, though you'd always be paying at least 1 generic less than that, to give our other creatures +1/+1, trample, and haste for the turn. Which is a pretty solid set of abilities. Lowering activating costs can make some activated abilities cheap enough to activate multiple times in a turn, and Agatha comes with a sort of bargain bin overrun that she lowers the cost of herself. So Agatha's definitely going to want ways to buff her power, which we'll mostly be doing through things like anthems, equipment, and enchantments in this deck. And a clear target is getting at least 4 power on Agatha so that her own activated ability is as low cost as possible. However, we have plenty of creatures with a wide range of types and costs for activated abilities in this deck, so in some cases, higher powers on Agatha will be appreciated. A significant number of creatures will be able to make creature tokens as an activated ability, letting us quickly build up a wide board, especially once Agatha starts lowering those activation costs. But generally this deck looks to do standard Gruul Stompy things, with a bend towards activated abilities. But that's enough of a preamble. Let's start digging into our 99, starting with our ramp. First up are Wayfarer's Bauble and Rampant Growth, which can tutor a basic land onto the battlefield tapped. Then we have Mind Stone, Fire Diamond, and Moss Diamond tapping for generic, red, and green, respectively. Felwar Stone is likely to tap for at least one of our colors, and Arcane Signet will tap for red or green. And then we have a couple of mana dorks with Incubation Druid and Zhur-Taa Druid. Incubation Druid taps for 1 mana of any type that a land we control could produce, but it taps for 3 mana if it has at least 1/+1/+1 counter on it, while having an activated ability to get some +1/+1 counters on it. And Zhur-Taa Druid taps for a green mana, but it deals 1 damage to each opponent when tapped for mana. Then Svella, Ice Shaper, has an activated ability to make a token mana rock, in this case Icy Manalith, which taps for any color mana. Svella also has a second activated ability that lets us look at the top 4 cards of our library and cast one without paying his mana cost, a great later game effect for when we've gotten some power buffs onto Agatha. Goblin and Archomancer makes it so that our red or green spells cost 1 generic less to cast. And finally, Magus of the Candelabra has an activated ability that lets us untap X lands, which Agatha can help lower the cost of, allowing us to untap more lands than the mana put into the Magus's ability. Now, as we already have seen through Svella, some of the activated costs on this deck can be pretty high, so we're going to want a good number of ways to increase Agatha's power so that we can get away with paying a lot less for these activated abilities. Equipment such as Bone Splitter and Hero's Blade can buff Agatha for fairly low costs, Bone Splitter giving +2 power with only 1 generic for an equip cost, and Hero's Blade gives +3/+2 while being free to attach to a legendary creature when said creature enters the battlefield. Then Forced Adaptation will progressively buff its enchanted creature during our upkeeps, and Tavern Brawler will give Agatha a rather variable power buff at the beginning of our upkeep, as it has us exile the top card of our library, and Agatha would gain +X power, where X was that exile card's mana cost. But we also get some card advantage with Tavern Brawler, as we can play that exile card the turn it was exiled. Roaring Earth lets us put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature we control whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control. And Drillworks Mole can be tapped to put a +1/+1 counter on itself and 1 onto Agatha. Then we have some anthems, starting with Sylvan Anthem, Paragon of Eternal Wilds, and Paragon of Fierce Defiance. The first 2 giving green creatures we control +1/+1, and the latter giving red creatures we control +1/+1. Hall of Triumph has us choose a color when it enters the battlefield, then creatures we control of that color get +1/+1. In general, green is likely to affect more creatures for our particular deck than red. Then Bortusk Liege gives other red creatures we control +1/+1, and other green creatures we control +1/+1, so +2/+2 for our Gruul creatures. And Gaia's Anthem gives all of our creatures +1/+1. Then Ulvenwald Oddity comes in as a 4/4 hasty trampler, but it has an activated ability that we hopefully won't pay even close to the full price for, to transform it into the Ulvenwald Behemoth, which gives our other creatures +1/+1, trample, and haste. Glorious Sunrise gives us a bunch of options to choose from at the beginning of our combats. but primarily for this deck is its first mode, giving creatures we control +1/+1 and trample for the turn, but we could also make a target land tap for 3 green mana for the turn, draw a card if we control a creature with power 3 or greater, or gain 3 life. Then Helena and Elena put X +1/+1 counters on a target creature we control at the beginning of our combat, with X being Helena and Elena's power. Then Forgotten Ancient can get a +1/+1 counter whenever a player casts a spell, and then we can move any number of those +1/+1 counters onto other creatures at the beginning of our upkeep. And finally, Tribute to the World Tree either has us draw whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, or otherwise, we put 2 +1/+1 counters on the creature entering the battlefield. But now that we have plenty of ways to increase Agatha's and our other creatures' power, let's start going over creatures that can make some creature tokens off of their activated abilities. Jade Mage, Ant Queen, and Ardaz, Cobbler of War, each make a 1/1 creature token without tapping, so we can make multiple in a turn if we have the mana for it. Ardaz additionally gives our creatures +2 power when they enter the battlefield under our control. Thundering Spineback makes 3/3 dinosaur tokens with trample, while giving our other dinosaurs +1/+1. And then Dragon Whisperer and Gorogoro, Disciple of Ryusai, make dragons as activated abilities. Dragon Whisperer making 4/4s with flying, but our creatures need to have a combined power of 8 before we can activate that ability. And Gorogoro makes 5/5 dragons with flying, but we need to attack with a modified creature that turn before we can activate this effect. Spitting Slime is a 3/3 ooze with Monstrosity 3 as an activated ability, where, if it isn't already monstrous, it gets 3 +1/+1 counters and becomes monstrous. But additionally, Splitting Slime also makes a token that's a copy of Splitting Slime when it becomes monstrous, and that token doesn't have the counters and isn't monstrous, so the cycle can repeat itself. And finally, Hydra Broodmaster is a 7/7 Hydra that has Monstrosity X, where it gains X +1/+1 counters when becoming monstrous, but it additionally creates XX green Hydra creature tokens when it's becoming monstrous. But with those, let's start looking into some of the other, more varied types of activated abilities we have to work with in this deck. To start, Almighty Brushwag is a 1/1 trampler that can have mana pumped into it to give it +3/+3 until the end of the turn. And Toadstool Admirer can have mana pumped into it to give it +1/+1 counters. Captivating Crew can let us gain control of a creature an opponent controls until the end of the turn, untapping it and giving it haste. And since we don't tap Captivating Crew to do this, we can do this multiple times in a turn, though we can only activate it at sorcery speed. Soulbright Flamekin can give a target creature trample until the end of the turn, but if its activated ability is activated for the 3rd time that turn, you can add 8 red mana to your mana pool. And Wildheart Invoker can give a target creature +5/+5 and trample until the end of the turn. Ball's Invoker deals 4 damage to each opponent with its activated ability, though you'll definitely want Agatha's power to be up quite a bit to lower that cost. And finally, Soul of New Phyrexia is a 6/6 trampler with the activated ability to give permanents we control indestructible until the end of the turn. But with that, let's start taking a look at the spells and creatures that we can use to interact with the stuff that our opponents are doing on their boards. Abrade, an artifact mutation, can be used to destroy a target artifact, with the former also capable of dealing 3 damage to a target creature, and the latter having us make X 1/1 Sapperling creature tokens, with X being the destroyed artifact's converted mana cost. Nature's Claim and Return to Nature can be used to destroy a target artifact or enchantment, though Nature's Claim has its controller gain 4 life, and Return to Nature could also be used for some graveyard hate. Beast Within lets you destroy a target permanent, though its controller gets a 3/3 beast creature token. And Chaos Warp has the owner of a permanent shuffle it into their library, and then they reveal the top card of their library, which they can play for free if it happens to be a permanent. Caustic Caterpillar, Viashino Heretic, and Gorilla Shaman are creatures that can be used for some interaction. Caustic Caterpillar is a one-time use to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. Viashino Heretic can be tapped to destroy a target artifact while dealing damage to that artifact's controller equal to that artifact's casting cost. And Gorilla Shaman has the activated ability to destroy a non-creature artifact with mana value of X, determined by the cost of that ability, but Gorilla Shaman doesn't need to be tapped to do this. And finally, in case things get out of hand for us, we have a couple of board wipes with Azuri's Predation and Blasphemous Act, the former making a 3/3 Phyrexian beast creature token for each creature we don't control, and then those beasts fight a different one of those creatures, letting us wipe lower power creatures from our opponents, while likely leaving us with at least a few extra beasts on our board. And Blasphemous Act simply deals 13 damage to each creature, wiping out all but the chonkiest of creatures, and those with Indestructible. Now let's go over some card advantage spells that will help keep us from top decking in the mid to late game. Harmonize, Shamanic Revelation, and Soul's Majesty are some one-off draw spells, with Harmonize simply having us draw 3, Shamanic Revelation having us draw for each creature we control, and Soul's Majesty has us draw cards equal to the power of a target creature we control. Lifecrafter's Bestiary has you scry 1 at the start of your upkeep, and lets you draw if you pay green mana while casting a creature spell. And Aureate of Mountain's Blaze has you discard a card to draw a card. And while these two aren't exactly growing our hands, they do give us some card selection. Owlbear Shepherd has us draw at the start of our end step provided creatures we control have a combined power of 8 or greater. And Colossal Majesty has us draw at the start of our upkeep if we control a creature with power 4 or greater. Diviner's Wand gives its equipped creature pay 4 mana, draw a card, and whenever you draw a card, this creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until the end of the turn. And if I understand this correctly, since this ability goes onto the creature Diviner's Wand is attached to, Agatha should lower the cost to activate. Though if I'm wrong about this, do mention so in the comments. And finally, Tawashi Guidebot has us put a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control when it enters the battlefield and can be tapped to draw a card. But now that we've gone through all the spells in our deck, let's go over our lands. Shire Terrace and Myriad Landscape are some land tutor lands that can also be tapped for generic mana if needed. And Cabaret Courtyard and Riveteer's Overlook are instantly sacked upon entering the battlefield, but let us tutor a basic forest or mountain onto the battlefield tapped, and giving us 1 life while we're doing this. Command Tower will tap for any color we need, and enters the battlefield untapped. Path of Ancestry will also tap for any color we need, but it enters the battlefield tapped. An Exotic Orchard is likely to tap for at least one of our colors. Then for some dual lands, we can start with Kapluzan Forest, a pain land, and then Rockfall Vale and Cinderglade are slow lands, the former entering untapped if you control 2 or more other lands, and the latter if you control 2 or more basic lands. Then we have Game Trail, a Reveal land, Gruul Turf, a bounce land, Temple of Abandon, a scry land, and Mossfire Valley converts 1 mana of any color into a red and a green mana. Opal Palace normally taps for a generic, but it can be used as a prism to convert mana color, and if that mana is spent to cast our commander, it enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of times it's been cast from the command zone that game. And Tyrite Sanctum can be used to make a legendary creature into a god while gaining a +1/+1 counter, and it can also give a target god an indestructible counter. Then War Room and Bonder's Enclave can give us access to some more card draw, though now on lands. And Mosswort Bridge has Hideaway, letting us look at the top 4 cards of our library and exiling 1 face down, which we can then play without paying its mana cost if creatures we control have a combined power of 10 or greater. Rogue's Passage can let us ensure that a creature gets through on an opponent. And finally, we'll fill the rest of our decks with 9 forests and 6 mountains, as there's more of a lean towards green mana pips than red in this deck. And now that we've gone over all of the cards in our deck, let's go over that price. And as you can see, the cost of this deck is sitting just over $44.50 at the time of recording, which includes our basic lands at 10 cents each, but it doesn't include the cost of things like shipping or taxes. But before ending this video, I'd like to go over a handful of cards you may wish to consider if you're wanting to upgrade or adapt this deck. Hound Tamer and Hydra's Growth can be great for growing our commander, and to be honest, I avoided putting Hound Tamer in the deck I'm releasing only due to not wanting to mess with the day-night cycle myself. It's not an expensive card. And Guardian Augmenter can be flashed in, giving our commander some protection with Hexproof along with +2/+2. Rhythm of the Wild and Uncivil Unrest gives our non-token creatures Riot, where they enter the battlefield with either a +1/+1 counter on them or with haste. Rhythm of the Wild additionally makes it so our creature spells are uncounterable, and Uncivil Unrest doubles the damage that creatures we control with +1/+1 counters on them would do to players or permanents. Tamiyo's Safekeeping is a great piece of protection for a single permanent, while Heroic Intervention can protect all of our permanents from, say, a board wipe. Colossus of Akros can be a pretty solid card in this deck, as it's a 10/10 indestructible defender, but it has Monstrosity 10, which can turn it into a 20/20, while giving it trample and letting it attack as though it didn't have defender. And finally, Walking Ballista gets even better in a deck like Agatha, as you can replenish its +1/+1 counter ammo for even cheaper than usual. But with that all being said, if you'd like to build, adapt, upgrade, or otherwise play with this deck, the link as always is in the description down below. If you liked the video, consider giving it a like, and maybe consider dropping the channel a sub if you'd like more budget commander decks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.